Now, the time is 17 minutes past 11. At least 119 people are now known to have lost their lives in the devastating floods in Texas. More than 170 are still missing. At a news conference earlier today, the Texas governor, Greg Abbott, was asked who should be blamed.
Let me explain one thing about Texas. Every square inch of our state cares about football. You could be in Hunt, Texas, Huntsville, Texas, Houston, Texas, any size community, they care about football. High school, Friday night lights, college football, or pro. And know this, every football team makes mistakes. The losing teams are the ones that try to point out who's to blame. The championship teams are the ones that say, don't worry about it, man, we got this. We're going to make sure that we go score again, that we're going to win this game. The way winners talk is not to point fingers. They talk about solutions.
Well, that was the Texas Governor, Greg Abbott, with an unusual explanation as he is facing questions about whether the state was sufficiently prepared and had sufficient warnings to cope with the devastating floods which have swept through parts of the state. Meanwhile, we've also had flash flooding in parts of New Mexico. We've had wildfires spreading across towards the French city of Marseille, and we're braced for a new heat wave here in the UK. I've been speaking to Dr. Michael E. Mann, Presidential Distinguished Professor of Earth and Environmental Science at the University of Pennsylvania. His new book, Science Under Siege, is coming out shortly. And he told me that we need to be prepared for more extreme weather, such as those flash floods which have hit Texas.
Unfortunately, yeah, this is a real tragedy, potentially hundreds of lost lives. And inevitably, these sorts of catastrophic events are often sort of compound in terms of the underlying causes. The ground in that area is extremely dry and hard, and so any rainfall tends to run off into the rivers, and that leads to potentially greater river flooding. But there's more rainfall than there would have been if we hadn't warmed up the planet and warmed up the oceans and put more water vapor into the atmosphere. There's about 7% more water vapor in the atmosphere on average because of the warming of the planet that we've caused from fossil fuel burning. Now, it turns out that it isn't just that extra moisture. When you have more intense storm activity, which is often true when you warm things up, when there's more moisture and there's more energy in the atmosphere, that can lead to larger amounts of moisture getting entrained into these storms. And so it's not just that 7%. In some cases, you're seeing up to 20, even 30% increases in the amount of rainfall due to, again, the warming of the planet and the increased moisture. As I said, that can combine with sort of drought conditions that preceded the event. It's been very dry in that region. I think it's an extreme drought right now. And this is something we're seeing more of in the Western U.S. and the central U.S. And so you sort of put those extremes together. Then there's one more ingredient here, which is the fact that these weather systems tend to stick around longer. And we see this across the entire northern hemisphere this summer, these sort of stuck heat domes that sit in place over Europe or North America for days at a time, or these low pressure systems with their flooding rains that stay in place for days at a time. And some of our own research shows that climate change is making those sort of stuck jet stream patterns more prevalent.
Is it then understandable that people are particularly concerned about the cutbacks in the US weather agency, the lack apparently of sufficient warnings? I mean, don't the authorities, whether at a national, a federal or a state level, need to be particularly geared up to these threats?
Yeah, and there's great irony there because the same administration that is defunding climate research is laying off climate researchers because of their opposition to the notion of climate change. It threatens vested interests, the fossil fuel interests that have such an influence in their party. And so the very same administration right now, and also the governor of Texas, a Republican governor who has Again, he's a climate denier. He's tried to defund climate research. But this same administration now is laying off NOAA workers who do forecasting, who simply do weather forecasting, the sort of forecasting that would have helped predict these conditions. And at the same time, laying off FEMA workers, people who are actually on the ground, helping people out, helping them cope with these disasters. So if you'll forgive the expression, it's a perfect storm of bad policy, ideologically motivated bad policy that has come together to yield this tragedy and so many more like it.
And you mentioned the fact that it's not just the United States that's seeing more extreme weather. We're heading into another heat wave here in the UK. We've had these terrible wildfires around Marseille. There was intense heat across Europe very recently. Do you think that not just in the United States, but here in the UK, where there have been some moves to row back on some of the net zero measures, that what we're seeing is that global warming is simply speeding up, and we're seeing these patterns right across the globe?
Yeah, and I've been in London during a heat wave, and it's not fun. It's not equipped. You don't have the sort of air conditioning, sort of infrastructure that you have here in the U.S. because traditionally Londoners haven't had to deal with the sort of extreme heat that we get here in the United States in the summer. And it's unfortunate that, as you allude to, we are seeing sort of a retreat from the more enlightened decarbonization efforts that were afoot in the UK. We've seen sort of a retreat from net zero goals, as you allude to. And the irony here is the argument is often, well, it's going to be too expensive to implement these policies. Exactly the opposite is the case. It's too expensive not to implement decarbonization policies because we're seeing the massive cost of climate inaction in the form of these damaging and deadly extreme weather events that we are now dealing with almost perpetually every summer.
Well, that was Dr. Michael E. Mann from the University of Pennsylvania, a leading climate change expert, speaking to me just a little earlier here on Times Radio.